There are moments in 31 years in this courtroom that I can't explain by any legal principle. This was one of them. A man stood before me on a cold Thursday morning. No lawyer, no defense, a wrinkled shirt, shoes polished in the center and cracked at the edges. 3 parking tickets, $380. On paper, it was nothing. The kind of case that takes 11 minutes and is forgotten before lunch. But something made me stop. Same street, same place, 3 nights in a row. Always after 3 in the morning. Patterns don't lie. And this pattern was trying to tell me something the process couldn't. So, I asked the question I always ask when the documents don't match the person in front of me. I said, "Why?" He looked at his hands, then he looked to his left. And that's when I saw her, sitting in the gallery, her feet barely touching the floor, a teddy bear under her arm and a toothless smile that had absolutely nothing to do with a courtroom. What happened next? I've rewatched that scene countless times, because what that little girl said as she climbed onto the witness stand in front of everyone in that room didn't just change my decision. It changed the street in front of that pharmacy. It changed a sign on the wall. And it changed how I understand the true purpose of this work. But before I tell you what she said, before we begin the story, comment here where you're watching from and what time it is there. If stories of justice, empathy, and hidden truths move you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There are cases that stay with you, not because they were complicated, not because the law was unclear or the facts were disputed, but because of the specific quality of silence in that room. A silence that felt like it had weight, like it had texture, like if you reached out and touched it, it would be warm. I have sat on this bench for 31 years. I have seen murderers who cried and saints who lied. I have seen the law protect people who didn't deserve protection and fail people who deserved everything. I have learned slowly and at great personal cost that the law is a living thing, and like all living things, it needs tending. It needs someone willing to look past the letter of it and ask what the spirit was always trying to say. I was 67 years old on that Thursday morning. My knees ached from the cold. The heating in courtroom 4 had been temperamental since October, and it was now February, and nobody had fixed it, and I had stopped being surprised by that. Some things in government buildings break and stay broken. You learn to wear an extra layer underneath the robe and say nothing. The fluorescent light above the witness stand had a flicker to it, a slow, almost polite flicker, like it was trying to warn you about something without being rude. I had asked 3 times to have it replaced. It hadn't been replaced. I had made my peace with the flicker too. The room smelled the way that room always smelled on cold mornings. Old paper, burnt coffee from the clerk's thermos, and something underneath it all that I can only describe as accumulated worry. Decades of it, soaked into the walls and the wood and the carpet that hadn't been changed since the 90s. People came into that room worried and they left with something else. Sometimes relief, sometimes devastation, sometimes a complicated mixture of both that didn't have a name. The worry stayed behind. It was the only thing that always stayed. My clerk, Margaret, set the first file on my desk at 8:52. She didn't say anything. She never needed to. In 22 years, she has learned my rhythms the way a person learns the sounds of a house they've lived in long enough. The creak that means rain is coming. The particular silence that means everything is fine. I put on my glasses. I opened the file. 3 counts of parking in a prohibited zone. Same location. 3 consecutive nights in December. Fines unpaid. Total amount outstanding, $380. No prior record. No legal representation. Appearance, mandatory. I read it twice, not because it was complex, because something about the pattern of it, same street, same spot, 3 nights in a row, made me slow down. In my experience, patterns always mean something. Carelessness rarely repeats itself with such precision. Precision, even in violation, suggests intention. And intention always has a reason underneath it. I set the file down. I folded my hands, and I waited. The door at the back of the courtroom opened at 9:03. I heard it before I looked up. The specific sound of the old brass handle turning, the particular drag of the bottom edge across the floor. I had heard that door open 10,000 times. I looked up anyway. He came in the way certain people enter rooms they know were not built for them, carefully, without taking up more space than necessary, as if he were aware that the architecture itself was designed to make him feel small and was trying not to give it the satisfaction. He was younger than I expected. I always notice that, how much younger they look in person than on paper. The file had given me facts. Facts don't give you the shadows under a person's eyes. He was wearing a beige dress shirt that had been ironed, I could tell, with real effort. The effort made it more heartbreaking, not less. The collar was a little too large for his neck. The sleeves had been rolled to the forearm and then unrolled and rebuttoned, probably that morning, because someone had told him or he had read somewhere that you should look respectful in court. His shoes were dark and had been polished recently. You could see where the polish didn't quite reach the worn edges, where the leather had cracked along the crease of the toe from years of walking. A man who still tries to look his best even when his best has been through things. He sat down at the defendant's table without being instructed to. He folded his hands on the surface in front of him, not confidently, not defiantly, the way a person holds their own hands when they have no one else to hold on to. I noticed his eyes move, just once, to the row of public seats to his left. I followed his gaze. There was a little girl sitting there, 7 years old perhaps, brown hair in 2 braids that were slightly uneven, one a little looser than the other, the kind of asymmetry that happens when someone is learning. She was wearing a floral dress that had been washed so many times the flowers had faded to suggestions of flowers. She was holding a stuffed bear by one arm, and when she noticed me looking, she did not look away. She smiled at me, a gap-toothed smile, one front tooth missing, the way all children lose teeth, without ceremony, without warning, as if the body is always already becoming something new. I looked back at the man at the defendant's table. He was still looking at his hands. I picked up my pen. I cleared my throat, not to command attention. The room was already quiet. I did it the way I always do at the start of a case that has already begun to feel like something more than a case, a small, private ritual, a way of saying to myself, pay attention, look carefully. You are not just an instrument of the law today. You are a witness. Margaret read the charges aloud in her flat, efficient voice. She has a gift for it, the ability to say devastating things in complete neutrality, the way a doctor reads a diagnosis. 3 counts of parking in a prohibited zone. Elm Street, directly in front of Weston's Pharmacy. December 9th, December 10th, December 11th. Fines issued on each occasion by Officer T. Briggs of the Municipal Parking Authority. Total outstanding balance, $380. Payment deadline passed. No response to written notice. Mandatory appearance ordered. When she finished, the flicker in the light above the witness stand completed one slow, full cycle. I looked at the man. Daniel, the file said. Daniel Mercer. I looked at him the way I have learned to look at people in that chair. Not at their face first, but at their hands. Hands tell you more than faces. Faces have been trained to perform. Hands forget. His hands were still folded on the table. The knuckles were dry and slightly raw, the kind of rawness that comes from washing them often in cold water, or from working with them in ways that strip away the softness skin is supposed to keep. The hands of a man who uses his body to earn his living and doesn't think twice about it, because thinking twice about it wouldn't change anything. I set my pen down. I said, Mr. Mercer, do you have legal representation today? He looked up. His eyes were brown and very tired. Not the tiredness of a bad night's sleep, the other kind, the kind that accumulates over months and doesn't leave even when you rest. No, sir, he said. His voice was quieter than I expected, careful. Do you understand the charges as they have been read? Yes, sir. And do you understand that the combined total of $380 represents a lawful debt to the municipality, and that failure to resolve this matter today may result in additional penalties, including potential suspension of your driver's license. Something moved across his face, fast, like a shadow from a cloud. He pressed his lips together. "Yes, sir," he said again. I watched him. The room was very quiet. Outside, somewhere above the drop ceiling and the insulation and the municipal concrete, I could hear the wind pressing against the building. February in this city is not subtle. It announces itself. It wants you to know it's there. I picked up the file again. I turned to the second page, the officer's report. Parking prohibited. Zone clearly marked. Vehicle unattended. First offense noted at 3:17 in the morning. I read that again. 3:17 in the morning. I looked up. "Mr. Mercer," I said, "the first citation was issued at 3:17 a.m. He nodded. The second at 3:41 a.m. the following night. Another nod. The third at 3:09 a.m. the night after that. He looked down at the table. I set the file down for the second time that morning. There is a particular geometry to a courtroom that I have always found instructive. Everything points inward. The gallery toward the bar toward the bench elevated just enough to suggest authority without quite touching arrogance. It is a room designed to focus, to narrow, to reduce a human life to the facts relevant to a single question. But sometimes the facts that are relevant are not the facts in the file. I have learned this the hard way, over 31 years and 10,000 cases and 2 children of my own, raised in large part by a man who sat where I sit now and tried every day to deserve the chair. My own father was a judge. He used to tell me, "The law is the floor, not the ceiling. Your job is to find the ceiling." I looked at Daniel Mercer. His shoulders were pulled slightly inward. His shirt collar was still a half size too large. He had polished his shoes that morning, and the polish hadn't quite reached the cracked edges, and he had come here alone, without counsel, with his 7-year-old daughter and her faded floral dress and her gap-toothed smile, and he had sat down and folded his hands and said, "Yes, sir, and yes, sir, and yes, sir." The system in that moment was a very large and very indifferent thing, and he was a very small figure inside it. I have spent 31 years trying to be the part of the system that remembers it is made of people. I leaned forward slightly. I clasped my hands on the bench, and I asked him the only question that has ever mattered to me in 31 years on this bench, the question the law doesn't require me to ask, but that everything else does. "Mr. Mercer," I said, and I made sure my voice was the kind of voice a person can answer honestly, "why did you do this?" He didn't answer right away. That didn't surprise me. In my experience, the people who answer immediately are usually the ones who have rehearsed. The people who pause, who look down at their hands or at some fixed point on the floor or at nothing at all, those are the ones who are trying to find the true version of something, the version that lives underneath the version they've been carrying around, the one they've been telling themselves was enough. Daniel Mercer looked at his hands. Then he looked at his daughter. She was watching him with a complete, uncomplicated attention that only very young children are still capable of, the kind of attention that doesn't edit itself, doesn't worry about what it looks like. She was just watching her father, the way she probably watched him every morning and every night, with the absolute and unquestioning certainty that he was the fixed point around which her world organized itself. He looked back at me. He said, "She couldn't breathe." The room didn't move. "My daughter, Lily, she has bronchial asthma. In December it got worse. 3 nights in a row she woke up and she couldn't—" He stopped. He pressed the back of his hand briefly against his mouth, a gesture I recognized. The gesture of a person who has learned to manage grief in small, private ways, so that it doesn't spill into spaces where other people have to navigate around it. She couldn't breathe right, and I needed to get her medication. The 24-hour pharmacy on Elm Street was the closest one open. I said nothing. I have learned that silence offered at the right moment is the most generous thing a courtroom can give. "I couldn't leave her in the car," he said. "She was 7. It was 3 in the morning. It was December." He looked at me directly then, for the first time, with something that wasn't quite defiance but was adjacent to it. The quiet insistence of a person who needs to be understood, not forgiven. I couldn't leave her alone in the dark. I nodded once. So I parked. I took her inside with me. We were never more than 10 minutes. I bought what I could afford and we went home. He exhaled slowly. I knew it was a no parking zone. I saw the sign. I made a choice. 3 nights, I said. She wasn't getting better. His voice broke on the last word, just slightly, just enough. She wasn't getting better, and I didn't know what else to do. I was doing everything I knew how to do, and it wasn't enough, and she still couldn't breathe. And at 3 in the morning, when your kid can't breathe, you don't. He stopped again. The fluorescent light flickered. In the gallery, I heard something. A small sound, almost inaudible. I did not look toward it because I knew what it was, and I knew that looking would interrupt something that needed to finish. "Mr. Mercer," I said quietly, "are you raising Lily alone?" The question arrived in the room like something physical. He nodded. He didn't trust his voice with more than that. "How long?" 8 months, he said. And then, because the truth has a weight to it that the body cannot always contain, her mother passed in March. The room absorbed this the way rooms absorb certain things, completely and without sound. I removed my glasses. I set them on the bench in front of me. I looked at Daniel Mercer, at the iron shirt and the cracked shoes and the raw knuckles, and the 8 months of grief he had packed down small enough to carry into a courtroom alone. And I thought about my own son, who was 31 years old and lived 4 states away and called me every Sunday without fail. I thought about the 2 years after his mother died when he was 9 and I was 43, and I stood in front of my bathroom mirror some mornings and gave myself exactly 60 seconds to fall apart before I put the face back on and went to make breakfast. I thought about what it cost to be the only fixed point, what it takes out of you day after day to be the thing that doesn't move so that someone smaller can have something to hold on to. I put my glasses back on. And then from the gallery came a voice, small, clear, utterly without hesitation. "Can I say something?" Every head in the room turned. Lily Mercer was standing up beside her seat, Bear held firmly under one arm, looking at me with the focused seriousness of someone who has identified a situation that requires her input and sees no reason to wait for an invitation. I looked at her for a long moment. "You may approach," I said. She walked to the witness stand the way children walk when they are being deliberately grown up, with great care and great concentration, each step considered. She climbed onto the chair. Her feet did not reach the floor. She settled the bear in her lap, looked out at the room with no apparent fear, and then looked at me. I leaned forward. "What would you like to say, Lily?" She thought about it, genuinely thought about it, the way children do when they take a question seriously. Her eyes going slightly upward, her lips pressed together. "My dad didn't pay the tickets," she said, "because he used the money for my medicine. And then he used the rest for my cereal because I wasn't eating and he got scared." She paused. "He cried one time when he thought I was sleeping, but I wasn't sleeping. I just didn't say anything because I thought it would make it worse." Not one person in that courtroom made a sound. "My mom died," she continued in the same steady voice, as though she were reporting the weather. "And now my dad does my hair. He practices on YouTube. They're not perfect yet." She touched one of her braids with her free hand, the looser one, the one that was always going to be a little looser. "But he keeps trying." She looked at me. "He's a good dad," she said. "He just didn't have enough money. That's all." She climbed down from the witness stand, walked back to her seat, and sat down with the bear. I did not reach for my pen. I did not reach for the file. I sat with what had just happened in that room for as long as a room full of people could sit with something before it began to overflow. Then I folded my hands, and I looked at Daniel Mercer, who was standing at the defendant's table with his hand pressed flat against his chest and tears moving silently down his face. And I said what I had already known, in the quiet underneath my ribs, from the moment I read the words 3:17 in the morning. The outstanding fines, All three counts, $380 in total, are hereby dismissed. The sound that moved through the gallery was not applause. It was something older and less organized than applause. It was the sound a room makes when it has been holding its breath and finally remembers how to let it go. Daniel Mercer put both hands over his face. His shoulders shook. I let it happen. I did not reach for the gavel. Some moments are not meant to be interrupted by the sound of wood on wood. When he lowered his hands, I said, "Mr. Mercer, look at me." He looked at me. "You made the right choice," I said. "Every single night. In every way that matters, you made the right choice. The sign was wrong to catch you. The law was right to bring you here. And this court will not punish a father for choosing his daughter." I paused. "You're doing a fine job with the braids," I said. "Keep practicing." Somewhere in the gallery, someone laughed through their tears. It is my favorite sound. It means the room has found its way back to itself. I banged the gavel once, not hard, never hard at the end of a case like that. Just enough to mark the moment, to draw a clean line between what had been and what would come next. A single quiet thud, like the period at the end of a sentence that took a long time to write. Daniel Mercer stood at that table for a moment longer than necessary. I think he needed to confirm that it was real, that the room was still the same room, that the air still moved the same way, that the floor still held him. When you have been carrying something very heavy for a very long time, the moment it is lifted doesn't always feel like relief. Sometimes it feels like vertigo, like your body had reorganized itself around the weight and suddenly doesn't know its own proportions anymore. He turned to look at Lily. She was already sliding off her chair, bear tucked under her arm, moving toward him with the unhurried confidence of someone who never doubted the outcome. She reached him, and he crouched down and wrapped both arms around her and pressed his face into the side of her hair, into the braids he had been practicing on YouTube, the imperfect, determined, deeply loving braids. And he stayed there for a long moment. I looked down at my bench. I looked at the file. 3 parking tickets, $380. The entire weight of the thing on paper amounted to 4 lines of typed text. I have held that thought many times in the years since, when the job feels abstract or procedural, or like I am simply moving paper from one side of a desk to the other. 4 lines of typed text. And underneath them, 8 months of grief, 2 jobs, a 24-hour pharmacy on Elm Street, and a father learning to braid hair from a video on his phone at 11 o'clock at night because there was no one left to show him how. Margaret collected the file without being asked. I rose. The room rose with me. I walked back through the door behind the bench and into the narrow corridor that connects Courtroom 4 to my chambers, and I stood there for a moment in the quiet and the dim, and the particular stillness of a hallway that exists only to be passed through. And I allowed myself 60 seconds. My wife used to say that I carried other people's weight home with me. She said it the way she said most true things, not as criticism, but as observation, with a kind of careful tenderness, the way you point out that someone has paint on their sleeve. She wasn't wrong. I do carry it. I have never found a way not to. But I have come to believe that carrying it is part of the job. Not the part that appears in the judicial code of conduct. The other part. The human part. After 60 seconds, I went to make a fresh cup of coffee. That was February. By June, something had changed on Elm Street. I didn't learn about it from the newspapers. I learned about it the way I learn about most things that matter, indirectly, through a chain of small human moments. Margaret mentioned it first, in passing, the way she mentions things she knows will interest me but doesn't want to make a production of. She said that Weston's Pharmacy had put up a sign. I asked her what kind of sign. She smiled in the way she smiles when she already knows how I'm going to respond to something. She handed me a photograph that someone had sent to the court, a printed image, slightly pixelated, taken by a phone from across the street. The sign was posted beside the no parking zone on Elm Street, directly in front of the pharmacy entrance. It was not large. White background, black lettering, a small red cross in the upper corner. It read, "Emergency parking, parents with sick children, no time limit, No fine. 24 hours. Underneath in smaller text, because sometimes love parks in the wrong place. I set the photograph down on my desk. I took off my glasses. I sat with that for a while. The owner of Weston's Pharmacy, a man named Gerald Weston, third generation, who had run that store for 22 years, had heard about the case from his evening pharmacist, who had been in the gallery that Thursday morning. He had made some calls. He had spoken to the municipal parking authority. He had navigated 6 weeks of paperwork and 3 separate city council subcommittees. And then he had put up the sign. When a reporter asked him why, he said, "I've been watching parents come in here at 3 in the morning for 22 years. It was past time someone did something about the parking." He was given a community service award in September. He said at the ceremony that the award belonged to a 7-year-old girl with a stuffed bear and a missing tooth who had walked into a courtroom and told the truth because nobody had told her yet that rooms like that were supposed to make you afraid. I was not at the ceremony. I was on the bench. But Margaret read me the quote the following morning, and I made her read it twice. As for Daniel Mercer, I know what happened to him because he wrote to me. A single page, handwritten, dated the following November. He had been promoted to a full-time facilities manager position at the gym where he'd been working part-time. He had moved into a slightly larger apartment, one with a second bedroom so that Lily no longer slept on the pull-out sofa. He said Lily had started second grade and had made 2 friends and was currently obsessed with a book series about a girl who trains dragons, and that he was working his way through it so they could discuss it. He said the braids were getting better. He said he wasn't sure why he was writing to me, except that it seemed important to let me know that he was okay, that they were okay, that the morning in courtroom 4 had been, in some way he didn't have the exact words for, a turning point. Not because the money was forgiven, though that mattered enormously, but because someone had looked at the whole of his situation and said, "I see what you were doing," and it was right. He said sometimes that was all a person needed. He was correct. I have read that letter many times. It lives in the left drawer of my desk, underneath the judicial code and the emergency contact list and the photograph of my son at his law school graduation. I read it on the days when the work feels like it is made entirely of procedure, when the distance between what the law says and what people need seems very wide and very cold. I read it and I remember that the distance is crossable, that it has always been crossable, that crossing it is, in fact, the job. 31 years on this bench has taught me many things. But the truest thing, the thing I would carve into the wood above every courtroom door if they would let me, is this. The law exists to serve people, not the other way around. The moment we forget that, the moment we let the machinery run without the humanity inside it, we have stopped doing justice. We have only started doing paperwork. A 7-year-old girl walked into my courtroom with a stuffed bear and no fear, and told the truth in 9 sentences. She reminded an entire room of people, including me, what the whole enterprise was for. I think about Lily Mercer often. I think about the braids getting better. I think about the dragon books. I think about the way she climbed into the witness chair with her feet not reaching the floor and looked out at a room designed to be intimidating and felt, apparently, no intimidation at all, because she had something more reliable than composure. She had clarity. She knew what was true, and she said it. We could all stand to be a little more like that. If this case moves something in you, if you recognize something in Daniel's exhaustion, or in Lily's courage, or in the particular loneliness of doing your best inside a system that wasn't built with you in mind, then you already understand what this channel is about. These are not exceptional stories. They are ordinary lives caught in extraordinary moments, and the only thing that makes them matter is that someone was paying attention. If you want to keep paying attention, subscribe. Leave a comment with the name of someone who reminds you of Daniel Mercer, someone who has been quietly doing everything right and just needs someone to notice. And share this with one person who needs to hear today that the distance is crossable. I'll see you in the next case. Court is adjourned. If this story reached something inside you, stop for just a moment and ask yourself, have you ever been in a place so desperate that you broke a rule just to protect someone you loved, and had no way to explain it to a world that only saw the breaking? Have you ever needed someone in a position of authority to look past the surface of what you did and actually ask you why? And have you ever been the one doing the judging, certain you had the full picture, only to discover that the most important truth in the room was being held by someone you almost didn't think to ask? Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. And if you believe in stories about compassion, second chances, and the kind of justice that remembers it's made of people, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.